Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and listening into the podcast. I can't say it enough. I really appreciate you for listening in. And because you've been listening, you helped us get ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes. So thank you for that. And I ask you to help us keep the podcast going. If you haven't done it yet, subscribe to the podcast. It would mean a lot. Most people assume career confusion happens early in a career. It makes sense that someone who is just starting out might not know exactly what they want to do. They are still discovering their abilities and interests and the opportunities available to them. But what I have observed over many years is something very different. Many high achieving women experience their greatest career uncertainty after they have already had some level of success. And by success, I mean after the promotions, after the recognition, after the career path appears to be firmly established. And then something subtle begins to happen. A question starts to surface, not loudly at first, more like a quiet inner awareness, a thought that appears during moments of reflection. And the question sounds something like this: is this actually right for me? So if you've ever had a moment like that, you may already recognize what this episode is about. So in this solo episode, I want to talk a moment about what many high achieving women experience, but rarely talk about openly. And it is the moment when the career you work so hard to build suddenly stops feeling clear. But not because you failed and not because you lack ability and not because the opportunities are gone, but because something deeper inside you begins asking a new kind of question. Sometimes that question is about direction. Sometimes it is about meaning. And sometimes it is simply a quiet sense that the path that once felt obvious now feels less certain. So, over these next several episodes of this podcast, I'm going to do a series of these solo episodes, and we're going to explore what I call the career crossroads. It is the point in a professional life when success, however you measure success, when success alone no longer answers the deeper questions about where you are going and why. And if you've ever experienced that moment, you may know that it can feel both surprising and disorienting because on the outside, everything may look exactly the way it's supposed to, but on the inside, something's not lining up. I remember a moment early in my professional life when I first encountered a version of this experience. At the time, I was working in my first professional position. I held a leadership role at a large bank in my hometown in Connecticut. And from the outside, it looked like a strong beginning to a career. I had responsibility, I had opportunity, and I had a clear professional path in front of me. Many people would have looked at that situation and said, everything is going well. And in many ways, it was. But I remember a moment when I realized that the question I was asking myself had quietly changed. And this happened after about 5 years of being there and doing that work. So before the 5 years, earlier in my career, leading up to that, the question had always been something like, how do I succeed here? How do I perform well? How do I grow into the responsibilities of the role? And how do I continue advancing? But at a certain point, another question began to surface, a different kind of question. And it sounded more like this: is this actually the direction I want my career life to go? The shift was subtle, but yet it was deeply significant because nothing was obviously wrong. The work was respectable, the role was meaningful in some ways, and yet something inside me was beginning to ask a deeper question about alignment. You may have experienced something similar, a moment when everything looked successful on the outside, yet internally, a new kind of reflection began. So over time, I began noticing that this experience was not unique to me, especially in recent years. I began to notice that this experience was not unique to me. In conversations with many high achieving women, I heard versions of the same moment again and again and again. Women who are capable, women who are accomplished, women who had built respected careers. And yet, at some point along the way, they found themselves quietly asking questions like, is this really the direction I want to continue in? Is this work truly an expression of who I am? If I keep moving on this path, where will it ultimately lead? These questions often came up at surprising times for them. Sometimes they appear after a promotion, sometimes after years of working toward a particular role, and sometimes simply after gaining enough experience to recognize that success and fulfillment are not always the same thing. Research on professional identity transitions suggests that people often reassess their careers after gaining experience and perspective. So the research says that people don't really start assessing their careers early in their experience, but it's after they've had a level and degree of experience and perspective on what they've been doing. So as individuals grow and evolve, their understanding of themselves also becomes clearer. And that clarity can sometimes create new questions about the paths they have chosen. And here's one of the reasons this moment can feel confusing is that many of us were taught to think about careers as a straight line. Choose a direction, work hard, advance, continue succeeding. But real careers rarely unfold in such a simple way. As people grow, their sense of identity grows as well. Values start to become clearer, interests deepen, priorities shift, and sometimes the career path that once felt perfectly right begins to feel incomplete. When that happens, many women assume something must be wrong. They may think, maybe I should be more grateful, or maybe I should just push through this feeling, or maybe I simply need to work harder. But often, what is actually happening is something very different. What is happening is awareness, a deeper awareness of identity, a deeper awareness of what matters, and a deeper awareness of the relationship between who you are and what work you are doing. So over time, I began to think about this moment, especially in recent years, as I've been working on a book that you've heard me talk about and reference, and I'm coming to the end of that process, but it has been giving me time to think. And I've been thinking about that moment that women experience as a career crossroads. It is the point where success no longer answers the deeper questions about direction. And when women arrive at this career crossroads, they assume they need to immediately make a new decision. But what I have observed is that the first step is not always a decision. The first step is often understanding what is actually happening, understanding the questions that are coming up, understanding the signals that you may be noticing, and understanding that this moment is not necessarily a problem to solve. Sometimes it is an invitation to pause and reflect more deeply. This question eventually became the starting point for the work I later explored in my book, Purpose Maker. But at the time, it simply felt like a moment of honest reflection about who I was becoming and what kind of work truly aligned with that. So, in the next episode, we're going to explore something that often surprises women when they reach this moment. This experience actually follows a recognizable pattern. Many high achieving women reach similar crossroad points in their careers. And when you begin to see the pattern clearly, something important happens. What once felt like a personal confusion begins to look more like a stage of professional development. So before we close today, I would like to leave you with a simple question to reflect on. And here's the question. Has there ever been a moment in your career when something that once felt clear suddenly started to feel uncertain? A moment when success alone no longer answered the deeper questions about direction. If that moment has appeared for you, it may not be a sign that something is wrong. It may be a sign that something important is asking for your attention. And in the next episode, we will begin exploring what that moment might mean for you. So until next time, this is Dr. Robin.